They told us it was just a tomb, a statue carved by slaves, honoring a long-dead pharaoh. But what if it wasn't? What if the great Sphinx of Giza, stoic, eroded? Silent was never meant to be a monument, but a message, a relic so ancient. Even the pharaohs themselves had forgotten who built it, because there's a story barely whispered, quickly dismissed that Khufu, the mighty builder of the Great Pyramid, did not create the Sphinx. He found it, buried in sand, worn by time. Forgotten by kings, the Sphinx appears not as a triumphant achievement of a civilization at its peak, but as the last surviving breath of something far older, something the dynastic Egyptians inherited but did not fully understand. Long dismissed as fringe theory, a curious little stone in the Cairo Museum known as the Inventory tells a different story. Discovered near the Temple of Isis, this stela was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu's own daughter, and on its surface is an unsettling confession: the Great Sphinx was already standing when Khufu arrived. The text does not boast of its construction. As was typical of pharaohs who claimed credit for everything they built, it speaks instead of maintenance, reverence, and mystery. Khufu is said to have found the Sphinx and merely restored it. Why would the most powerful king of the Old Kingdom credit someone else, someone unknown, with such an iconic monument? This isn't the only riddle wrapped in the sand. Modern geologists and archaeologists have raised troubling questions about the erosion patterns found on the Sphinx. Traditional Egyptology says it was built around 2500 BCE, chiseled from limestone bedrock during the reign of Khafra. But the deep vertical weathering etched into its flanks tells a different story. These patterns aren't caused by wind and sand, the kind of erosion you'd expect in the Sahara, but by thousands of years of consistent, heavy rainfall. But there's a problem. The Giza Plateau hasn't seen that kind of climate in over 7,000 years. This would place the Sphinx at a time long before Egypt's first dynasty, before hieroglyphs, before temples, before even the Nile ran as it does today. If true, this would make the Sphinx not just old, it would make it prehistoric. The implications are staggering. For if the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, then it also predates the rise of Mesopotamia, the invention of writing, and the entire recorded history of humanity. It suggests that some forgotten people were capable of carving a monument 240 feet long and 66 feet high, with technical precision, astronomical alignment, and symbolic intent. At a time we are told humans were still living in mud huts and hunting with stone tools. But if the Sphinx wasn't built by Khafra or Khufu, then who did build it? Who had the tools, the knowledge, the reason? Some say it could have been the remnants of an earlier advanced civilization, one erased by cataclysm or climate change. Others point to oral traditions and mythic histories, stories like those told by the ancient Egyptians themselves, who spoke of a Zep Tepi, a time before time, when the gods walked the earth and great knowledge was passed down. Could these myths be faded memories of a lost golden age? The face of the Sphinx itself offers a strange clue. Studies comparing the facial proportions of the Sphinx with known statues of Khafra show little resemblance. The shape is narrower, the features less refined, the symmetry disrupted, as if the current head had been recarved atop an older, eroded body. Some researchers have suggested that the head may have originally been that of a lion, a regal symbol aligned with the constellation Leo. If true, this would match the alignment of the Sphinx toward the rising sun on the vernal equinox, an orientation that would have perfectly coincided with the age of Leo around 10,500 BCE. Even stranger still is the idea that the Sphinx was never meant to be a tomb guardian or royal symbol at all, but something entirely different, a kind of ancient marker, an anchor in time, built to survive upheaval, a relic encoded with messages not meant for its own era, but for ours. And isn't that what it feels like when you stand before the Sphinx? It does not speak of glory or conquest. It whispers. It stares through you, not at you. Its silence isn't empty. It's heavy, watchful, as if it remembers something we've forgotten. The Giza Plateau, too, seems less like a necropolis and more like a vast puzzle. The Sphinx is not an isolated monument. It sits beside the Great Pyramid, the Valley Temple, the Osiris Shaft, and a network of subterranean tunnels and chambers whose purpose remains obscure. Some believe these form an ancient clock or star map, an astronomical device built on a scale we can scarcely comprehend. Why would a civilization build so much effort into stone, into permanence, unless they feared something would be lost? Could the Sphinx and its surrounding structures be part of a much larger system of preservation, a record for future generations, a kind of ark? In recent decades, advanced remote sensing has revealed anomalies beneath the Sphinx's paws, rectilinear cavities, chambers, and geometric voids. The most intriguing of these was discovered in the 1990s, using ground-penetrating radar. Despite the evidence, further excavations have not been allowed. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has repeatedly denied access to explore these anomalies, citing preservation concerns. But critics argue that the truth is being suppressed not to protect history, but to protect a version of it. And what of the ancient texts, now lost or buried? The Temple of the Sphinx once stood proudly before the statue, its columns echoing with prayers and rites. Today, most of it lies in ruin. The dream stele carved by Pharaoh. Thutmose IV, over 1,000 years after Khufu, sits between the Sphinx's paws and tells of a boy king who saw the statue in a dream and was promised power if he cleared the sand from its body. But even that stele makes no mention of who built it. No name, no date, no signature, just a face in the sand, staring through time. In a world where we're constantly told that the past is known, cataloged, and understood, the Sphinx stands as a crack in the narrative, a reminder that history is not a closed book, but a palimpsest scraped clean and rewritten again and again. Each new era burying the last. But the stone remembers, and if we dare to listen not with our ears, but with our questions, we might just hear what it's been trying to say. Not a monument, not a tomb, a message, left for us by hands we do not know, from a time we cannot name, in a language we have only begun to rediscover. In the blazing silence of the Egyptian desert, the Great Sphinx sits half submerged in sand, weathered and worn. To the casual observer, it seems natural, inevitable. Even that the passage of thousands of years would strip its face, crack its flanks, and soften its once angular form. But to the trained eye of a geologist, something isn't right. The weathering on the Sphinx doesn't match the desert. It doesn't whisper of wind or sand or time, it screams of water. Heavy water. Rain. Not the occasional desert shower or Nile overflow, but sustained. Torrential downpours over centuries. Deep vertical channels rounded. Rolling erosions carve the Sphinx's enclosure walls and body, cutting through limestone like soft clay. These aren't the marks of a monument exposed to dry air and swirling sands for 400 or 500 years. They are the signature of a subtropical climate, the kind Giza hasn't seen since the end of the last ice age. The problem, according to mainstream Egyptology, the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, around 2500 BCE, a time when Egypt was already dry, arid, and desertified. There was no heavy rain. There hadn't been for millennia. And yet, the Sphinx tells a different story. It doesn't just tell it, it wears it, like a scar. Enter Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University. He wasn't looking for controversy. In fact, he was invited by fellow researcher John Anthony West simply to assess the erosion as a geologist would not as an archaeologist trained in the orthodox view. What he found stunned him. The patterns etched into the enclosure walls surrounding the Sphinx were textbook examples of water erosion, not wind. The rounded, undulating surfaces weren't compatible with a desert climate. They matched regions that experience regular, prolonged rainfall like those found in subtropical or temperate zones. To reconcile this with Egypt's known climate history, Schoch concluded the Sphinx must have been carved not in 2500 BCE, but sometime between 7000 BCE and 9000 BCE, or possibly even earlier. That would place its origins in the Neolithic period, a time when Egypt was still green, fertile, and covered in savanna-like grasslands teeming with wildlife. And yet, according to the textbooks, no advanced civilization existed than just scattered tribes, primitive tools, no writing, no monumental architecture. So how could a people with no known infrastructure or metallurgy carve such a massive and precise structure from limestone bedrock? The deeper one digs literally and figuratively, the more the contradictions pile up. The walls of the Sphinx enclosure sit several meters below the surrounding desert. If sand and sediment have steadily buried the structure over thousands of years, that would suggest an even earlier origin, one that predates the first dynasty of Egypt by millennia. Furthermore, the Valley Temple next to the Sphinx, constructed from limestone blocks quarried directly from the enclosure, bears the same erosion pattern, reinforcing the theory that the entire complex was subject to a wetter climate long before pharaohs ruled the Nile. Egyptologists pushed back. They argued the weathering could have been caused by groundwater or chemical salt erosion, but Schoch and others countered that groundwater erosion affects stone differently. It causes flaking and exfoliation, not deep vertical channels. Wind erosion, too, creates horizontal striations and sharp-edged abrasions, nothing like the rolling patterns visible on the Sphinx today. Others suggested the enclosure may have been artificially flooded in ancient times, perhaps as part of a ritual, but there is no evidence, textual or archaeological, to support such claims. The overwhelming weight of geological analysis pointed to the simplest answer: the Sphinx is older than Egypt, far older. But if the Sphinx does predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, it forces a radical reassessment of human history. We would have to accept that a lost civilization, one with the ability to plan, quarry, align, and sculpt on a massive scale, existed before the rise of Sumer, before Babylon, before any known empire. This aligns with myths and oral traditions from Egypt and beyond. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, an era when the gods walked among men and taught them the secrets of civilization. In South America, similar tales describe golden ages and sky-born teachers. Could these be distorted memories of a vanished global culture, one scattered by catastrophe and preserved only in stone? And what happened to them if such a civilization existed? Why did it disappear? Climate change provides one possibility. Around 10,500 BCE, the Earth emerged from the Younger Dryas, a rapid cooling event that had gripped the planet for over 1,000 years. During this transition, Global temperatures rose, ice sheets melted, and sea levels surged more than 400 feet. Coastal cities, if any existed, would have been swallowed by the ocean. Flood myths from nearly every culture echo this memory: a sudden deluge, divine retribution, the drowning of a great civilization. Perhaps the builders of the Sphinx perished in this cataclysm, or perhaps they moved, leaving behind monuments as breadcrumbs across the world: Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Nan Madol in Micronesia, the undersea ruins of Yonaguni, the unfinished obelisks in Aswan. Clues left not for their contemporaries, but for us. Curiously, the Sphinx is not alone in bearing signs of ancient rainfall. Satellite images and sediment samples from the Sahara suggest the entire region was once a lush, fertile landscape covered in lakes, rivers, and vegetation. Dubbed the Green Sahara, this brief window of fertility occurred between 8000 BCE and 3000 BCE, aligning almost perfectly with the water erosion observed on the Sphinx. During this time, nomadic cultures flourished. Rock art from places like Wadi Sura and Tassili Najer show humans swimming, hunting giraffes, and living in verdant oases. These were not deserts. They were worlds of water and life, worlds that could support large populations and, potentially, large-scale building projects. So, we return to the question, where did the rain go? The answer lies in a slow, brutal transformation. As Earth's axial tilt and orbital patterns shifted, a phenomenon known as the Milankovitch cycle, the African monsoon weakened. Rainfall declined, lakes dried up, grasslands faded, the Sahara turned to dust. Those who lived there either died out or migrated toward the life-giving Nile, bringing with them fragments of knowledge, stonecraft, and memory. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Sphinx was built during that great transition when the sky still wept, when green still clung to the Giza plateau, and when the earth itself was shedding one world and birthing another. Yet this possibility remains mostly ignored by mainstream academia, because to accept it would be to admit that our story isn't linear, that we are not the peak of a steady climb from ignorance to enlightenment, but the survivors of forgotten ages. It would require humility, a willingness to say, we don't know. And that's a difficult thing for any institution to do. But the Sphinx doesn't care for dogma. It stands regardless of our theories, our textbooks, or our arrogance. It does not beg for attention. It demands it. And when it rains, rarely, briefly, violently, its skin seems to come alive again, like a ghost remembering its form, as if, in those fleeting moments, it remembers the world it was born in, a world we can barely imagine, a world washed away. There is a silence that stretches over the Giza plateau like a forgotten lullaby, still, windblown, golden. But if you close your eyes and drift backwards through time, not decades or centuries, but thousands of years, this place comes alive with the sounds of water and wings. The Sahara, as we know it now, is a graveyard of sand and silence. But it wasn't always that way. There was a time when this entire region pulsed with life, when rain fell in sheets, not whispers, and the land wore green instead of gold. Lakes shimmered under the open sky. Rivers twisted like serpents through meadows. Herds of gazelle, giraffes, and elephants wandered freely. Birds, fish, and frogs thrived in a web of wetlands. It was not desert, it was paradise. And in the heart of that lost Eden stood the Giza plateau. not yet a place of ghosts and tourists, but a living center of human mystery, a highland surrounded by fertile plains, perhaps chosen for a reason, for visibility, for safety, or maybe for memory. Because the Sphinx and the pyramids, those titanic puzzles in stone, do not belong to the world as it is. They belong to the world as it once was, a world lush and alive. And that raises a question too often ignored. What if these monuments were not built in the desert, but in a jungle, not in death, but in life? Satellite scans and sediment cores have told a tale that textbooks ignored for decades. Beneath the dunes lie the scars of ancient lakes, buried shorelines, riverbeds dried like cracked veins. In Chad, what is now an expanse of sand was once Lake Megachad, larger than the modern Caspian Sea. In Libya and Sudan, signs of vanished water tables and aquatic fossils. And in Egypt, the once green corridors of the Western Desert are traced with ancient rock art showing hippos, crocodiles, swimmers, and rainstorms. We are not speculating. We are remembering. Between roughly 10,000 BCE and 3000 BCE, the Sahara experienced a climatic anomaly called the African Humid Period. During this window, the entire region bloomed into a savanna. The Nile itself was fuller, stronger, unruly. Monsoon rains drenched the land. This isn't guesswork, it's etched into the DNA of the earth. Lakebed deposits, pollen samples, and prehistoric tools all speak of a time when the desert was a garden. So if the pyramids and Sphinx are older than we think, as geological evidence increasingly suggests, then they may have been built not by sand dwellers, but by green livers, forest walkers, lake worshippers. The implications are staggering. What if the civilization that built Giza did not rise from the desert, but fell into it? What if the monuments we revere were not the beginning of something, but the end? Not an ascent, but a survival, as climate shifted and the green gave way to gold. Perhaps the people of the fertile Sahara retreated to the Nile, bringing with them a memory of mastery, the knowledge of how to quarry, align, and elevate massive stone, the wisdom to encode astronomy, mathematics, and myth in limestone. What we now call dynastic Egypt may have inherited a legacy, not invented it. The Old Kingdom, for all its glory, may have stood on the shoulders of a forgotten age, and Giza may be its final whisper. Look again at the pyramids, not as tombs, but as time markers. They are too precise, too aligned with celestial phenomena to be random. The Great Pyramid aligns almost perfectly with true north. The three pyramids mimic the belt of Orion. Their dimensions encode constants of nature, the golden ratio, pi, and even the speed of light if one calculates their longitude in meters. How could farmers and chiselers of 2500 BCE have achieved this with such accuracy? The tools of dynastic Egypt were copper and wood ill-equipped to carve granite and diorite with such precision. But a civilization born in the lush, long-forgotten Sahara, possibly existing for thousands of years before history officially begins, may have developed techniques, tools, and knowledge we no longer possess, or worse, have misinterpreted as myth. In this light, even the gods of Egypt take on new meaning. The stories of Ra, Osiris, Thoth, and Isis may be garbled memories of ancestors or figures from the old world, leaders of a vanished society deified over millennia. Zep Tepi, the first time, is described not as a myth, but as a period of high civilization when gods ruled alongside men. Perhaps this is how survivors of the climate collapse preserved their truth through symbol, allegory, and stone. The transformation from green to gold was not just environmental, but cultural, a collapse and a restart. And in that transformation, memory became myth. This isn't just theoretical. Archaeologists at sites like Nabta Playa have uncovered megalithic stone circles aligned with the stars, predating Stonehenge. These ancient calendar systems existed in Egypt's western desert before pyramids were ever conceived. And who built them? Nomads, cattle herders, or the last of the green Saharan priests, trying to hold on to a vanishing sky, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, equally ancient, equally enigmatic, shows that humans were building temples before cities, sacred places, before settlements. What if Giza was part of that same forgotten tradition? The Sahara didn't die overnight. Its transformation was slow, generational, but the consequences were seismic. As rain retreated and rivers dried, once thriving regions turned to dust. Populations were forced to migrate. Some may have vanished. Others, perhaps the elite or priestly classes, consolidated around remaining water sources like the Nile. And what if, as a final act of preservation, they left us monuments time-proof, flood-proof, fire-proof, built not to glorify a single pharaoh, but to outlive the desert itself? The Sphinx may not guard a tomb, it may guard a memory, a marker not of a ruler's pride, but a civilization's warning. So why don't we know this? Why does the mainstream still insist that Giza was born in arid sand? Partly because we look at ruins and assume decay. But what if some ruins are older than we dare believe? And not ruined by time, but by change. The landscape has shifted. The climate has erased. What we find now are not beginnings, but remnants. Not dreams, but echoes. And science is finally catching up. With new tools, LiDAR, satellite imaging, deep sediment analysis, we're seeing through the veil, the lost lakes, the buried roads, the civilizations that weren't supposed to exist. And Giza quiet, monolithic, eternal may be the loudest of them all. When you stand before the pyramids today, you're not looking at sand-colored giants in a desert. You're looking at greenstone ghosts, ancient sentinels from a forgotten Eden. They are not just tombs. They are warnings, memories, beacons. They are the last songs of a world that once breathed with rain and bloomed with grass, and whose greatest stories have yet to be unearthed. Imagine standing before the Great Pyramid, not as a tourist, but as a silent observer of something far older than history admits. You tilt your head to its apex, perfectly angled to the heavens, and ask yourself, could this have been a coincidence? The structure is massive, yes, a feat of unimaginable human labor, but it's also something else, something coded, something measured with an intelligence we've barely begun to grasp. Because buried in the limestone bones of this monument lies a number that refuses to be ignored, 200. A strange number, a precise number. And when decoded, it doesn't point to a tomb, a king, or a dynasty. It points to the cosmos. You see, if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. Multiply its base perimeter by the same number, and you arrive at Earth's equatorial circumference. Not approximations, exact matches. But how? And more urgently, why? Why would anyone encode such data in stone, unless they knew what they were doing? Here's where things become difficult to dismiss. The number 43,200 is not random. It is a harmonic of the Earth's axial precession, a slow 25,920-year wobble of the planet's rotation, observable only over vast stretches of time. Precession alters the position of the stars, gradually shifting constellations and solstices over millennia. Ancient astronomers would have needed hundreds, even thousands of years of uninterrupted sky watching to calculate this. Modern science only confirmed it in recent centuries. Yet this number 43,200 is exactly 1.666 times 25/920, a ratio, a key, one used not just to scale the pyramid to Earth's size, but perhaps to encode celestial cycles into architecture. What does that imply? Not a symbolic alignment, but a scientific one. Whoever designed the pyramid knew the Earth's dimensions and its long-term astronomical mechanics long before Copernicus, Newton, or any of the instruments modern science prides itself on. The idea that an ancient civilization could understand Earth's radius is staggering enough. But what if it goes deeper? The Great Pyramid is perfectly aligned with true north, off by just 3/60ths of a degree. This level of precision is difficult even with satellite-guided equipment today. The base is level within less than an inch. Its corners point to the cardinal directions with uncanny accuracy. And internally, its dimensions reflect mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, not by chance, but in ratios too consistent to ignore. This suggests not only astronomical awareness, but an advanced grasp of geometry, surveying, and geodesy, which raises a chilling thought. Are we looking at the ruins of a civilization not behind us, but above us, not less advanced than the Egyptians, but forgotten ancestors from a golden age that understood Earth from sky level and encoded their memory in stone? Traditional Egyptology dismisses these connections as coincidence, but the numbers stack up like blocks of their own monument. The Great Pyramid contains no hieroglyphs, no inscriptions claiming credit, not a single pharaoh's name carved within. It is silent, austere, and eternal. Was that deliberate? Perhaps it wasn't meant to be a tribute, but a time capsule, one intended to survive floods, fire, and forgetfulness. A message to the future, us. Because if we are only now, in the age of satellites and physics, deciphering the pyramid's full meaning, then maybe it wasn't meant for the people of 2500 BCE. Maybe it was meant for those who would one day rediscover the same numbers, 200, 25,920, 3.14159. This is not mythology. This is mathematics carved into geology. And here's where the number becomes even more haunting. 43. 200 is not just tied to Earth, it's tied to the sky. That number, when applied to the precession of the equinoxes, helps track the shifting of the zodiac constellations over millennia. Every 260 years, the sun rises in a new zodiac sign during the spring equinox. 12 signs, 12 ages. One full cycle takes 25,920 years. Divide that by 2/3, and you get 43,200. That's not just a measure. That's a language, a celestial calendar encoded in limestone. And when viewed this way, the Great Pyramid isn't just a tomb or a temple. It's a timekeeper, a machine of stone built not for the dead, but for memory itself, for those who would one day awaken to the patterns again. This understanding ripples outward. The Sphinx, with its leonine body, faces directly east toward the rising sun at the spring equinox. Its weathering patterns suggest far greater age than its traditionally accepted 400 to 500 years. Could it date back to the age of Leo, approximately 500 BCE, when the Lion constellation rose behind the sun? If so, then the Sphinx, like the pyramid, is part of a larger cosmic message. The Giza plateau becomes a clock marking epochs, not reigns, and 43,200 is the calibration constant, the universal password, whispered in stone. One can't help but ask if these structures were built to encode celestial knowledge. Who were the builders? Not the Egyptians we know. Their own texts speak of a first-time Zep Tepi, when gods walked among men, and civilization was gifted, not discovered. Were those gods the survivors of a prior world, not divine, but advanced with telescopic memory and seismic awareness? If so, the pyramids are not the pinnacle of a civilization, they are the monument of its echo. Modern scholars are beginning to reopen these doors. LiDAR mapping and advanced scanning techniques have revealed internal chambers never explored. Subsurface anomalies suggest the Giza plateau holds more than we've uncovered. And from Bolivia to Turkey to Indonesia, megalithic sites with similar celestial alignments are being reevaluated. Göbekli Tepe, Gunung Padang, Tiwanaku. Were these sites part of a lost global knowledge system? One that understood Earth's place in the heavens and left breadcrumbs in monuments of impossible precision. Perhaps that is what 43,200 truly represents. A signature, a watermark from a forgotten age, one not erased by time, but encoded within it. One that speaks through numbers because numbers never lie. It doesn't shout, it whispers to those who listen. And if you're lying in bed, drifting off into sleep, know this above you. The stars are moving slowly, almost imperceptibly carving their long spirals in the dark. And far below, buried in the silence of the sand, a number waits. A number that fits the earth like a key. 43,200. Not just a number, a cosmic coordinate, waiting to be remembered. There is a silence in the Great Pyramid that isn't truly silent. Step into the king's chamber, deep within its stony core, and you will feel it before you hear it, the low, humming resonance, faint but persistent. Like a deep breath exhaled by the stone itself. The granite walls seem to absorb your presence and return it in vibration. No decoration adorns these walls. No hieroglyphs, no carvings, no pharaonic claims, just seamless slabs of polished pink granite, quarried hundreds of kilometers away and placed here with maddening precision. But why? What is this room? If not a tomb? It feels less like a burial site and more like an instrument, an acoustic chamber, tuned and alive, still responding to tones we've long forgotten how to produce. Is it possible this space was never meant to be seen, but heard? Or more than that, felt? Imagine, for a moment, not a dead pharaoh, but a living ritual. Torches flickering against the stone, low chants reverberating through the chamber, and a resonance subtle, enveloping, almost medicinal, vibrating the bones of those inside. Modern researchers who've stood in the king's chamber have noted that certain frequencies, especially around 110 Hz, cause the granite walls to sing. It's not merely an echo. It's a full-bodied vibration that lingers in the air, stimulating the inner ear and altering brainwave patterns. At that frequency, a person's brain can shift from beta to alpha states, calmer, more meditative. Some even report out-of-body sensations, as if the space itself is designed to detach the mind from its normal boundaries. But who could have known this, and why embed such psychoacoustic technology in a monument supposedly built for the dead? Consider this: granite is rich in quartz, a mineral known to amplify and transmit energy. This is not New Age mysticism, but physics. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates electric charge when subjected to pressure. What happens when thousands of tons of quartz-rich granite are arranged in a confined, precision-cut chamber? Could the builders have understood that sound and stone together could produce a form of energetic transmission? Could this room be an ancient frequency device activating subtle energetic states, not with wires or software, but with sound and intention? This isn't a leap into fantasy. The same principles underpin modern technologies, from sonar to ultrasound. The difference: the Great Pyramid does it with nothing but stone. Further still, experiments with tonal instruments inside the king's chamber reveal that the room is harmonically tuned. Its dimensions match musical ratios: perfect fourths, perfect fifths, producing natural standing waves. These waves interact with the human voice in strange ways, creating resonant feedback loops that build in intensity. Some suggest that the sarcophagus-like box in the chamber solid, lidless, and oddly proportioned may not have been meant to hold a body, but to enhance this resonance. Its frequency response aligns with the chamber's own acoustic profile, making it behave like a tuning fork. The granite sings when struck, not metaphorically, literally, like the inside of a bell. Now imagine ancient initiates, priests, sages, or perhaps engineers of consciousness lying inside this vessel, surrounded by chanting, drumming, humming. The pyramid amplifying and focusing vibrational energy not just on the ear, but on the body itself. Some researchers liken it to a sound healing chamber, capable of altering physical and mental states. Others suggest even more advanced uses: memory activation, trance induction, or cellular stimulation. Infrasound frequencies below the threshold of human hearing has been proven to affect human physiology, inducing everything from unease to euphoria. What if this was known not to us, but to a civilization that worked with resonance, not radiation, with harmony, not hardware? This isn't isolated to Egypt. Around the world, from Malta to Chavin in Peru, ancient sites demonstrate eerily similar acoustic properties. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni resonates at nearly the same frequency as the king's chamber. Inside it, voices transform, vibrate, and reverberate in ways that seem engineered, not accidental. The oracle chamber in Chavin de Huantar uses subterranean canals to amplify and distort vocal sounds, creating a voice of the gods. And at Stonehenge, acoustic studies suggest the circle acts as a resonator, trapping and enhancing specific sonic frequencies. It's as if these ancient cultures shared a lost global science, one that worked not with written equations, but with geometry, vibration, and stone. Was this knowledge passed down or rediscovered in isolated bursts? Some propose that the Great Pyramid represents the high watermark of this science, a structure so precisely engineered that it continues to function as a resonant device millennia later. In that view, the king's chamber becomes a laboratory of sound still humming, still working, still alive. And if that's true, what else lies encoded in the stone? Not just the frequencies of earth and sky, but the frequencies of the self, of spirit, of transformation. Even now, modern musicians and scientists visit the chamber to test it. Drummers speak of tones that travel through the spine. Singers report harmonics they've never heard before. Binaural beat researchers have found the chamber induces measurable changes in brainwave states. It's a place that doesn't just echo sound, it sculpts it, shapes it, becomes a participant in it, as if it remembers the songs it was once meant to hold. So the next time you imagine the pyramids, don't think only of tombs. Think of tone, not stone laid upon stone, but sound laid upon silence. Vibrations nested within geometry. A frequency machine built not of wires and code, but of resonance and intention. The pyramid, then, becomes a kind of amplifier, not just of sound, but of awareness. A cathedral without priests, a speaker of forgotten truths. And in the middle of it, the king's chamber hums quietly on, waiting for those who can still hear. You are lying in bed now, your breath slowing, your heart sinking to some older rhythm. And as the darkness deepens, you might begin to sense a low vibration not in your ears, but in your bones. A song of stone, a memory that isn't yours, but feels familiar. The pyramid still sings, and maybe, tonight, it sings for you. There are things we accept about the past, not because they make sense, but because we've been told they must be true. The Great Pyramid is one of those things. We're told it was built by hand, using copper tools, wooden sledges, and brute human strength over decades, maybe centuries. But when you step closer, when you run your fingers along the ancient stones and stand beneath the towering weight of nearly 6 million tons of limestone and granite, the cracks in that story begin to show. This is no haphazard heap of stone. It is not crude. It is not the rough work of slaves with chisels. This is a monument of precision so staggering, it seems to defy the very era we place it in. A riddle in geometry and engineering, standing still, yet silently mocking our understanding of history. Start at its base, a foundation that spans over 13 acres. Across that entire stretch of stone, the variation in level is just 2.1 centimeters. That's less than the width of your fingertip across a field that could host 8 football pitches side by side. Even today, with lasers, drones, and satellite-guided instruments, creating that level of precision would demand exceptional planning and resources. And yet we're to believe this was accomplished using only rudimentary tools, ropes, and sheer will. The explanation begins to falter before the first block is even set. And then comes the alignment true north. Not kind of north, not close to north, but within 3/60ths of a degree. That's more precise than many modern buildings. In fact, no other structure on Earth aligns more perfectly to true north than the Great Pyramid. To achieve that kind of alignment requires not only awareness of the cardinal directions, but an intimate understanding of Earth's axial rotation knowledge we didn't officially confirm until centuries after Galileo. How could this have been done in 2500 BCE? Some propose stellar alignment using the stars of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor to find the pole. Others point to solstice shadows and horizon tracking, methods that would take years to refine with astronomical accuracy. But even these don't account for the margin of precision. There are no mistakes here, no structural corrections, no mid-project changes. Every side of the pyramid, every block, every angle carefully measured, set, and placed with an obsessive consistency. At this scale, errors should multiply, foundations should shift, blocks should settle unevenly. But somehow, they didn't. And if they did so in perfect harmony. The casing stones, many of which are now gone, were polished smooth, cut to fit so precisely that even a razor blade couldn't slip between them. Some stones weigh between 10 and 80 tons, and yet they are fit together as if poured into place. There is no mortar, only pressure, only geometry, and perhaps something else we've yet to identify. Transporting such stones from distant quarries is a mystery in itself, but maneuvering them into exact position, dozens of meters above the ground, without cranes or pulleys. How is this explained? The ramps hypothesized by conventional theories would require more material than the pyramid itself, and would have left traces long since uncovered. Yet the desert remains silent. And then there is the internal design shafts that point directly to specific stars, passageways angled with geometric consistency, chambers aligned with celestial events. The king's chamber, queen's chamber, the grand gallery, they are not simply hollowed spaces, but meticulously tuned environments. Even the supposed air shafts seem to have had no practical ventilation purpose, but instead align with stars Orion's belt, Sirius, and others at the time of construction. How could anyone calculate such alignments without advanced astronomy, without an understanding of Earth's axial precession? These aren't decorations. They're coordinates, star maps carved in stone. This is architecture beyond architecture. Not just function, but philosophy. Not just geometry, but cosmology. The pyramid doesn't just exist, it knows where it is. On Earth, in the cosmos. It acknowledges cardinal directions, stellar alignments, planetary proportions, and even Earth's curvature. The ratio of its perimeter to its height mirrors the ratio of Earth's circumference to its radius. Coincidence, perhaps? Or perhaps we are looking at a language we no longer speak, a language of stone and scale and sky. If so, what kind of civilization spoke it? It's tempting to rationalize this away, to assume it was all trial and error, or that ancient laborers slowly wore down stone with copper chisels over generations. But even modern stonemasons struggle to replicate the cuts found at Giza. The speed, precision, and symmetry observed in the shaping of granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, would be daunting even with diamond-tipped saws. And some marks suggest rapid rotary cutting, not the slow grinding expected of rudimentary tools. Tool marks, when they exist, show signs of drilling and sawing methods that seem anomalously advanced. So again, the question echoes louder. Who built this and how? We're not talking about aliens or fantasy here, but something much stranger, something terrestrial, human, and yet unknown. Perhaps a forgotten civilization that mastered techniques lost to time, or a lineage of builders whose understanding of material, geometry, and celestial order exceeded even ours in some respects. The evidence doesn't demand science fiction, it demands humility. A willingness to admit that we may have underestimated the depth and age of human ingenuity. When you walk around the Great Pyramid under the pale light of dawn, you begin to sense it, not just the weight of stone, but the weight of intention. Every angle, every proportion, every alignment feels chosen, not merely built. It's as though the pyramid is not just an object in space, but an object of space, mirroring the patterns of stars and the proportions of the planet itself. And to do this without machines, without steel, without digital computation, it forces us to ask what kind of minds stood here before us, and what have we truly forgotten? As you lie back now, feeling the hum of your own heartbeat against the quiet, let your mind drift not toward answers, but toward questions. Not toward timelines, but toward mysteries. The Great Pyramid does not whisper of slaves and sand and whips. It sings of precision, purpose and presence, of builders who worked not with mere tools, but with an awareness that stone could carry memory, and that memory could echo through millennia. Perhaps it's time we stopped calling them primitive. Perhaps they were simply tuned to a frequency we no longer hear. There is something humbling about standing before ancient stone weathered by wind, scorched by sun, and yet defiant against the entropy of time. At first glance, sites like Stonehenge, Baalbek, and Göbekli Tepe seem separated by culture, language, and geography. One is ringed in misty fields of England. Another rises defiantly in the highlands of Lebanon. And the third lay buried for millennia beneath the dry soils of southeastern Turkey. But when you look closer, not with modern arrogance, but with ancient curiosity, a strange pattern emerges. Across thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years, these monuments echo one another in ways no textbook can fully explain, not just in stone, but in intention, in alignment, in knowledge, as though they were all built by different hands, but guided by the same invisible map. Begin at Stonehenge, not the version softened by tourism and postcards, but the raw, original mystery. Massive trilithons standing in a horseshoe, with lintels precisely balanced atop uprights, arranged to capture the first light of the solstice sun. This is not a crude calendar. It is astronomical choreography, one that tracks lunar cycles, solar alignments, and even eclipses. The bluestones, dragged from over 200 kilometers away in Wales, were believed to hold healing powers. But who made this decision? Who understood the geometry, the acoustics, the resonance of stone beneath the site? Buried animal bones and human remains hint at rituals lost to time, ceremonies that may have combined sound, light, and movement in ways we've long forgotten. This wasn't just a gathering place. It was a celestial stage. Then there is Baalbek, the temple complex in Lebanon, where the stones defy belief. The foundation alone houses blocks weighing more than 800 tons, not stacked haphazardly, but aligned with millimeter precision. These aren't small adjustments, they are feats of engineering that would challenge us today, even with cranes and advanced logistics. The Trilithon 3 of the largest stones ever used in construction rests seamlessly above 6 immense lower blocks, as though placed by unseen machinery. And yet, there is no record of how it was done. Roman additions atop the site tell only part of the story. Baalbek's deeper foundations are older, perhaps much older, and aligned not only to the cardinal directions, but to constellations and celestial movements now buried in myth. The site hums with something ancient, an intent that transcends empire and religion. A whisper, not of conquest, but of cosmic dialogue. And then comes Göbekli Tepe, the place that broke the timeline. For decades, archaeologists believed civilization began with agriculture, then villages, then temples. But Göbekli Tepe upended that logic. Built over 11,000 years ago, 7,000 years before the pyramids, it was a site of spiritual gathering before permanent farming ever took root. Carved pillars, some over 5 meters tall, are adorned with reliefs of animals, abstract symbols and geometric patterns. They stand in concentric circles, arranged with mathematical foresight and astronomical alignment. But who built this? Before writing, before wheels, before metal tools, and more haunting still, why was it buried on purpose, not by erosion or time, but by human hands? It's as if the builders wanted to hide it, protect it, seal it from a world that no longer remembered its purpose. Despite the distance between them, All three sites seem to carry the same signature, an advanced understanding of astronomy, sound, geometry, and purpose. The stones are not merely large, they are precisely placed, aligned to solstices, lunar standstills, stellar risings. Why was this important? Why did so many cultures go to such lengths to track the skies with stone? Some suggest it was agricultural, a way to measure seasons. But these were more than calendars. They were instruments, ritual theaters, cosmic mirrors. The ancient mind did not divide the heavens and the earth. To them, the sky was not just a map, but a living memory. To encode that memory in stone was to participate in something divine. Perhaps what we've forgotten is not how to lift stones, but how to listen to them, how to understand that resonance, placement, and orientation mattered. That knowledge was not just stored in words, but in materials, geometry, and alignment. That a monument wasn't just a structure, but a song, a message, a code. Göbekli Tepe's circular enclosures may have mirrored star maps. Stonehenge's acoustics could have amplified chants and frequencies in ways that induced altered states. Baalbek's megaliths may have stabilized or tuned energy within the earth itself. These aren't fantasies, they are theories drawn from sound physics, archaeoastronomy, and the study of sacred geometry. We've just lost the cultural vocabulary to see them as anything more than myth. Some scholars now suggest these sites may have belonged to a forgotten global tradition, an ancient legacy passed down not through empire, but through memory. A sacred science rooted in observation, ritual, and harmony. Not to dominate nature, but to align with it. Could there have been a time when different peoples, separated by land and language, still spoke the same symbolic truth, the same cosmic grammar? It's tempting to think in terms of isolated genius, but maybe these aren't isolated wonders. Maybe they are fragments of a much older world we've only just begun to remember. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine what it would feel like to stand before these sites in their prime. Before erosion, before interruption, before forgetfulness. Picture the light of the solstice sun threading through a stone circle. Feel the vibration of a chant echoing off megalithic walls. See a star rise exactly where the builders said it would thousands of years ago. What knowledge did they have that we've let slip through our fingers? What did they build that we've buried in sand and skepticism? The past is not mute. It speaks. In stone, in symmetry, in mystery. And it waits patiently for us to start listening again. Imagine walking the earth 12,000 years ago, long before writing, long before nations or kings. The world is colder then, just beginning to thaw from the ice age, and yet something stirs in the human mind. Something grand. In the mountains of Turkey, massive stone rings emerge. In the jungles of Central America, stepped pyramids rise from mist and vine. On the coasts of Peru, perfectly cut stones slot together like puzzle pieces, untouched by mortar, unmoved by time. Across the ocean, on distant Easter Island, colossal heads gaze skyward, silent witnesses to mysteries long lost. These are not the random outbursts of unrelated tribes fumbling their way toward architecture. They speak the same language not of words, but of form, of orientation, of the stars. All around the globe, in cultures supposedly disconnected by oceans and time, the same patterns emerge. Monumental architecture aligned to cardinal directions, temples designed to mirror celestial constellations, pyramids built with proportions that echo sacred mathematics. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid reflects the golden ratio and encodes the precession of the equinoxes. In Mesoamerica, the Pyramid of Chichen Itza casts a perfect shadow serpent during the equinox. In Angkor Wat, the temple complex aligns with the Draco constellation, just as the Giza pyramids do with Orion. How is it possible that cultures with no recorded contact spread across millennia, built with the same cosmic blueprint? These connections are not whispers. They are shouts etched into stone, and they defy the mainstream narrative that says humanity only began building civilizations 6,000 years ago. Göbekli Tepe stands as an anomaly older than any known temple, built before agriculture and buried on purpose. Its existence alone demands a rewriting of history. But what if it's not alone? What if it's just the first uncovered piece of a forgotten world, one that spanned continents, carried knowledge of the stars, and encoded it into sacred architecture? It is here that the whispers of Atlantis return not as a myth, but as a metaphor. Plato spoke of an advanced civilization lost beneath the sea, destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Many dismiss this as allegory, but what if its memory is not of a single island, but of a global society washed away by rising seas, earthquakes, and cosmic impacts? During the chaotic end of the Ice Age, sea levels rose over 100 meters as glaciers melted. Vast coastlines where early humans likely settled now lie submerged. Could the remnants of this world still be hidden beneath waves and sediment? Look to the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, massive underwater terraces, too geometric for mere coincidence. Or to the Gulf of Kambat, where sonar scans revealed submerged structures resembling cities off India's coast. Even off the coast of Cuba, strange stone formations lie deep underwater, suggesting the presence of ancient foundations. These aren't proven cities, but they provoke a question. If a civilization existed before the flood, how much of it now lies underwater, erased not by war, but by nature? And yet, the memory lingers in myths, in monuments, and in map-like knowledge passed through oral tradition. The Dogon people of Mali, for example, have ancient astronomical lore about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by modern telescopes. Polynesian navigators tracked stars with such precision that they could sail thousands of miles without maps or compasses. The Aboriginal songlines encoded geography and astronomy into story and song. All these hint at something deeper, a long chain of memory, stretching across generations, carrying fragments of a greater past. So, what if this global civilization wasn't like ours, obsessed with conquest and consumption, but instead focused on harmony, not primitive in their tools, but advanced in understanding the rhythms of nature, the vibration of stone, the alignment of human intention with the cosmos? Maybe they didn't leave behind machines or electronics, but wisdom embedded in myth, number, and monument. Maybe their science was spiritual, their spirituality scientific. Skeptics ask, where are the tools, the cities, the writing? But perhaps we're asking the wrong question. We assume that all advanced civilizations must look like ours. But what if theirs was quieter, built in resonance with the earth rather than resistance to it? What if the ruins we now dismiss as isolated marvels are really the scattered fingerprints of a once cohesive worldview? One we barely recognize because we've forgotten how to see it. As you drift to sleep, consider this: what if the great monuments of the world are not tombs or temples, but memory palaces encoded with geometry, astronomy, and sound meant not to be used, but remembered. What if they speak to a time when the world was more connected than we can now fathom, before borders, before nations, when the sky was a common scripture and stone was the sacred page? The ancients may not have left us books, but they left us clues. And if we begin to listen through mathematics, through myth, through sacred alignment, we may begin to uncover not only who they were, but who we were, and who we are still meant to become. It was a quiet moment in history, easily overlooked. No fanfare, no sweeping announcement. Just a small, crawling robot inching its way through the ancient heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was 1993, and the German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink had built the device to explore the mysterious shafts leading from the so-called Queen's Chamber, slender passages no human could enter. The robot crept slowly upward, guided by remote control and intuition, climbing a steep incline carved into stone thousands of years ago. Then, it stopped. Not because the machine failed, but because it reached something impossible. At the end of the shaft, after more than 60 meters of twisting limestone, the robot's camera revealed a strange slab, a stone door unlike anything ever seen in the pyramid before. It was polished smooth. It had 2 metal pins embedded into it, almost like handles or hinges or locks, but the shaft was sealed. Behind it, silence. The discovery should have shaken the world. Instead, it was buried under bureaucracy. For nearly a decade, the door remained unopened. Questions swirled. Why a sealed shaft inside the pyramid? What lies behind that door? Why 2 metal pins in a monument supposedly devoid of metal tools? And why did the shaft exist at all? Finally, in 2002, a new robot was sent in. The world held its breath. The device drilled through the first mysterious door only to find another door just behind it, smooth, intact, unmoving. A second barrier, deeper still within the pyramid's anatomy. What was this place? A tomb within a tomb, a vault of forgotten knowledge, or something altogether stranger? Then, silence returned. Access was restricted. No further exploration allowed. The second door remains sealed to this day. For centuries, the Great Pyramid has stood like a riddle in stone tall, timeless, enigmatic. Mainstream Egyptology tells us it was a tomb, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2 to 500 BCE, but no mummy was ever found inside. No inscription claims it as a resting place. No paint, no hieroglyphs, no declaration. Just architecture, pure, precise, and mystifying. So why build shafts leading nowhere? Why seal them off with doors too small for humans to enter? Were they symbolic passages for the soul? Ventilation ducts, as once assumed. But if so, why metal pins, something never found elsewhere in the pyramid's construction? And why does the deeper you go, the stranger things become? Beneath the pyramid lies the so-called subterranean chamber, an unfinished void carved deep into the bedrock, rough, irregular, unadorned. A stark contrast to the mathematical perfection of the king's chamber above. Why begin construction so far underground, only to abandon it? Or was it abandoned at all? Some suggest it was never meant for burial, but for something far older, far more mysterious. Legends from ancient Arab texts whisper that deep beneath the pyramid lies a hall of records, a vault of sacred knowledge preserved from a time before the flood. Stories speak of hidden chambers containing ancient scrolls, instruments of power, even maps of the stars. Were the shafts sealed with doors designed to protect something or someone? In recent years, technological scans have revealed additional voids within the pyramid, large cavities previously unknown. One such chamber, dubbed the Big Void, stretches over 30 meters above the Grand Gallery. Its purpose still unknown, its contents still unreached. Even stranger, the Great Pyramid appears to encode mathematical constants within its dimensions, p-pi, golden ratio, and the precession of the equinoxes. Its sides are aligned within fractions of a degree to true north. Its base is nearly perfectly level over 13 acres, and its internal passageways reveal knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and acoustics far ahead of what we typically credit to ancient Egypt. So again, the question emerges, were these sealed doors simply symbolic, or were they guardians of something? Consider this: if an advanced civilization existed prior to the known dynasties, one capable of megalithic architecture, precise alignments, and encoded knowledge, might they have left behind messages or mechanisms for a future age? Could the sealed shaft be a lockbox, waiting to be opened only when we are ready to understand? What if the pyramid is not a tomb, but a time capsule? Modern science has barely scratched the surface, and yet even that scratch has revealed anomalies, resonant chambers that amplify sound, mysterious electromagnetic fields, and materials engineered with startling precision. If a message lies hidden behind that sealed door, what form might it take? Not ink on papyrus, long since turned to dust, but frequency, vibration, light, information encoded in architecture, in placement, in design. Perhaps we are not meant to force entry. Perhaps the Great Pyramid is a puzzle, and like all puzzles, it requires the right mind, the right moment to unlock. As you lie in the dark, and the silence of night wraps around you, picture the robot frozen in place. Imagine its tiny camera, staring at a slab of stone untouched for thousands of years, a door that should not be there. Behind it, more stone, more silence, and a secret waiting in the shadows of the past. You see, the most powerful truths are not always buried deep beneath the earth. Sometimes, they are hidden in plain sight in corridors of stone, in the hum of resonance, in the silent stare of a sealed door that refuses to open until we ask the right question. Beneath the ever-watchful gaze of the great Sphinx, the desert winds sweep endlessly across the Giza plateau. For millennia, the lion-bodied guardian has crouched at the edge of the Nile's shifting sands, its enigmatic face staring east into the rising sun. But what if its greatest secrets are not in its silent expression, but in what lies below? In the 1990s, something extraordinary happened. A team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar began scanning beneath the paws and belly of the Sphinx. What they found was not just ordinary limestone or natural voids, but distinct, rectangular anomalies, geometric cavities, man-made shapes buried deep in the bedrock. Chambers under the Sphinx. The scans were performed by independent geophysicists working alongside the Edgar Cayce Foundation, whose controversial predictions had long claimed a hall of records would be discovered beneath the Sphinx containing lost wisdom from a forgotten epoch before ancient Egypt. To mainstream science, that sounded like fantasy, and yet, the radar data showed something real, something deliberate. The subterranean shapes revealed under the Sphinx's forepaws appeared too symmetrical to be natural, and in multiple locations, not just one. Most notably, a large rectangular chamber beneath the front paws, measuring roughly 9 by 12 meters, stood out. It was not a cave. It was a structure, The data was confirmed by Thomas Dobecki and John Anthony West, who presented their findings at geophysical conferences. Even Egypt's own antiquities authorities initially acknowledged the anomalies. Then something strange happened. Silence. No permission was granted to excavate. None. Not even minimally invasive drilling. Despite multiple requests, scientific, academic, private, every attempt to explore beneath the Sphinx was denied. And not for a few years. For decades. Why? Here we stand. In an era of deep-sea submersibles and planetary rovers, yet we are not allowed to dig mere meters beneath one of Earth's most iconic monuments, despite verified evidence of an anomaly. What are they afraid we might find? Mainstream Egyptology insists that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, around 2500 BCE. But that attribution rests primarily on proximity, not hard evidence. There is no inscription linking Khafra directly to the Sphinx. No mention of its construction in any surviving Egyptian texts. Theories abound, but no proof. Meanwhile, the erosion patterns along the Sphinx's flanks, deep, vertical, and wave-like, suggest the monument stood through centuries of heavy rainfall. And that kind of rain hasn't touched Giza in over 7,000 years. Which raises the question, is the Sphinx far older than we've been taught? If so, who built it, and what did they leave beneath it? The mystery deepens when you look at the dream stele, placed between the Sphinx's paws by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, over 1,000 years after the supposed construction date. The inscription, worn and fragmented, hints that the Sphinx existed long before Thutmose's time, and that he merely rediscovered it half buried in sand. He describes a divine encounter, a voice from the Sphinx promising kingship if it were restored, but no mention of building it. Not even Khafra did that. All signs point to the Sphinx being a relic of a much earlier age. Now imagine what might lie beneath it, a sealed chamber, untouched for thousands of years. Perhaps a burial, perhaps a library, perhaps something far stranger. And yet, to this day, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities refuses any attempt to investigate. Why? Is it political? Are they protecting national treasures, or is there something deeper, something uncomfortable to acknowledge? If a chamber were found beneath the Sphinx, especially one predating dynastic Egypt, it would upend centuries of archaeological consensus. It would suggest the existence of an advanced civilization lost to history, one capable of carving the world's largest monolith, aligning it to celestial markers, and encoding sacred geometry in its proportions. And if that civilization existed, where is the rest of it? Some theorists believe the answer lies beneath our feet. The Giza Plateau may be riddled with hidden tunnels, shafts, and chambers. The so-called Tomb of Osiris, discovered in the 1990s, descends nearly 100 feet into the bedrock and contains multiple levels. Why such depth, such complexity? In a site already brimming with mysteries, perhaps the Sphinx is not a monument, but a key, a marker, a guardian of something so ancient, so destabilizing, that its very presence threatens the official timeline of human civilization. Something that cannot be allowed to see daylight, not yet. It is not difficult to imagine the outcry if such a chamber were opened. Textbooks would need to be rewritten. Our understanding of human history, of the rise of civilization, of the origins of myth and memory, would change forever. The comfort of linear progress from primitive hunter-gatherers to modern society would collapse under the weight of one discovery. That's a powerful reason to keep the ground sealed. But secrets have a way of surfacing. Technology marches forward. Every year brings more non-invasive tools, thermal imaging, muon detection, seismic scanning. In 2023, new data again suggested the existence of cavities beneath and around the Sphinx and pyramids, and still no dig, and so the statue sits, silent, still, a lion carved from bedrock, too weathered for its supposed age, guarding a land whose memory reaches beyond dynasties and into myth. Perhaps the real mystery is not what lies beneath the Sphinx, but why we're not allowed to know. Tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine standing alone before the Sphinx under a moonlit sky. Imagine the sand cold beneath your feet, the stars wheeling overhead. There is no sound but the whisper of wind. You reach out to touch the stone and feel the faintest vibration beneath your palm. A hum, a memory, a truth, long buried, waiting not to be found, but remembered. What if everything we know about human history is only what was permitted to remain? Tonight, let us return once more to the deserts of Egypt, where silence holds secrets better than any vault. Imagine walking alone through the ruins of Abydos, Saqqara, or Karnak temples where pharaohs once chiseled the story of mankind into stone. The hieroglyphs shimmer faintly in torchlight, their messages frozen in time. But in some places, there are gaps, blank cartouches, entire walls defaced, names of kings deliberately chiseled out, columns collapsed with surgical precision. It is not erosion. It is not the passage of time. It is something else, something deliberate. Throughout ancient Egypt, there are whispers of vanished dynasties, pharaohs whose names are absent from official records, whose reigns are missing from king lists, whose temples were wiped from the earth as if their existence posed a threat to those who came after. And stranger still, there are tales of kings who ruled before Egypt was Egypt, kings from the time when the gods walked among men, rulers of the so-called Zep Tepi, the first time, a mythical age of divine kingship and forgotten wisdom. These names appear in texts like the Palermo Stone and the Turin King List, but many of these texts are either fragmented or lost entirely. Some didn't disappear naturally. They were destroyed. The Temple of Heliopolis, once one of the greatest centers of ancient Egyptian learning, is almost completely gone. Not because of earthquakes or age, but because it was systematically dismantled. The same is true of countless old kingdom temples. Precious inscriptions were defaced. Entire records of lineage were erased, altered, or suspiciously incomplete. Why would a civilization, obsessed with legacy, one that documented everything from offerings to star positions, suddenly forget to write down decades or even centuries of their own rule? The answer may not be forgetfulness, but intention. Take the case of Akhenaten, the heretic king of the 18th dynasty. After his death, his name was scratched from monuments, his statues smashed, his legacy reduced to ashes. The priests wanted to erase him, and they nearly succeeded. For centuries, Akhenaten was a ghost in the timeline. A whole city, Amarna, was swallowed by sand. Only recent excavations unearthed the truth. But if this could be done to a known king of a well-documented dynasty, what might have been done to others even older? What about the kings before the first dynasty, those in the shadowy realm of prehistory? In the Valley Temple near the Sphinx, a pattern emerges. The walls bear signs of intentional damage, as if some force, not war, not weather, but something calculated brought them down. Not all at once, not randomly, but in pieces, key areas where inscriptions might have told too much. Engineers have noted that blocks weighing tens of tons were found toppled in patterns suggesting internal failure, not external attack. The Turin Papyrus, a precious artifact listing hundreds of kings, was found in over 160 fragments. By the time it reached modern hands, many sections referencing pre-dynastic rulers had been damaged beyond recovery. Why is it that so many of these fragments relate to the earliest periods of Egypt's history? Who benefits from that void? And then there's the Library of Alexandria. Though built in the Ptolemaic period, this ancient center of knowledge was said to house scrolls far older than the Greek age scrolls from Egypt, Babylon, India, even Atlantis. According to some accounts, it held hundreds of thousands of texts, many from the earliest civilizations, and yet, multiple fires, looting, and a suspicious lack of official records erased almost everything. What we call the burning of the library may have been more than a tragedy. It may have been a strategic deletion. This isn't just an Egyptian mystery. In cultures across the world, from the Maya to Mesopotamia, we find evidence of ancient knowledge that was erased or sealed away. In Sumer, early tablets speak of kings ruling for tens of thousands of years before the flood. But later lists truncate those reigns, editing them to fit a more digestible history. Why? Was there an effort global, deliberate, and coordinated to wipe the slate clean? The evidence suggests that history, as we know it, has undergone more than just revision. It has undergone reset. Imagine, then, that the past 5,000 years are not the full span of human civilization, but merely the chapter that survived. The tip of an iceberg whose bulk lies submerged, hidden by time, tide, and the careful hand of censorship. But who or what orchestrated this erasure? Some point to religious or political regimes, pharaohs wanting to rewrite their lineage. Others suggest that entire priesthoods, entrusted with knowledge of ancient technologies and cosmic truths, chose to seal that knowledge away, fearing its misuse. And a few whisper of something even older, a forgotten cataclysm, a flood of fire or water that not only destroyed the world, but demanded it be forgotten. Tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, consider this. If you had knowledge that could shatter the foundations of civilization, knowledge of technologies, origins, or beings, long lost, would you protect it? Would you hide it beneath monuments? Etch it in symbols only the initiated could decode? Or would you let it be destroyed so that humanity could start again? Safely ignorant. Perhaps the true history of Earth is not what was written, but what was carefully left out, and somewhere beneath the sands, behind broken walls, or in the chamber beneath the Sphinx, that forbidden story still waits to be told. The pharaohs of Egypt were obsessed with legacy. They stamped their names into obelisks, temples, tomb walls, and even the smallest statuettes. They documented their victories in exhaustive hieroglyphs, filled their mortuary temples with grand tales of conquest, and immortalized their faces in polished stone. But among all these monuments, giant and small, one colossus remains conspicuously nameless. The great Sphinx of Giza. She stares eastward, unmoving, unspeaking, enduring, carved from a single, massive outcrop of limestone. The Sphinx is one of the largest and oldest known monuments in the world. Her face is eroded, her body weathered, and time has eaten away at many of her secrets. But one question echoes louder than the winds that scour her flanks. Why didn't any pharaoh claim her? This silence is not normal. The Sphinx is impossible to ignore, an architectural marvel that would have been the pride of any Egyptian ruler. If Khafra, the widely believed builder of the Sphinx, had truly ordered its construction, Would he not have inscribed his name boldly onto its chest? Would he not have documented the monument in his tomb or temples? And yet he did not. Not a single official inscription from Khafra's time confirms his connection to the Sphinx. There is no carving, no text, no decree that says, I, Khafra, built this. Egyptologists have long pointed to the Sphinx temple's proximity to the Valley Temple of Khafra as circumstantial evidence, but this is inference, not proof. In fact, the dream stele, erected by Thutmose IV, nearly 200 years after Khafra, stands between the Sphinx's paws and contains a cryptic reference to a forgotten past. In the stele's partially eroded text, Thutmose describes falling asleep beneath the Sphinx and receiving a divine message. The Sphinx, speaking to him in a dream, calls itself the guardian of a great secret and promises the young prince kingship if he will clear the sands from its body. But the Sphinx does not name itself. It does not say, I am Khafra, nor does it reveal who carved its face or chose its orientation. If anything, the dream stele only deepens the mystery. Why would a godlike statue need a young prince to rescue it unless its creators were long gone? Its purpose long forgotten. Now consider this: many scholars and independent researchers argue that the head of the Sphinx is disproportionately small compared to its body. Carved from the same block of limestone, the body shows signs of extreme erosion, some say by water, not wind. Meanwhile, the head appears relatively fresh, almost like an afterthought. Some geologists suggest the Sphinx once had a different head altogether, perhaps that of a lion, symbolic of the constellation Leo. If the body predates the head, and the head may have been recarved, then the original monument could be far older than Egypt's 4th dynasty, and that begs an even deeper question. What civilization carved it, and why did later pharaohs remain silent? Egyptologists argue that the absence of royal inscriptions could be due to erosion, vandalism, or simple oversight. But that logic doesn't hold. Consider the fact that even much smaller, less significant statues and tombs from the same era have survived with pristine inscriptions. Why would a monument of this magnitude be left unsigned? One possible answer: they didn't build it. To claim the Sphinx would have been to tell a lie. And the ancient Egyptians, for all their myth-making, treated monumental inscriptions as sacred contracts between the living and the divine. To falsely inscribe one's name onto a sacred guardian of unknown origin might have been seen as blasphemy or even dangerous. Others believe the Sphinx was so ancient by the time of the earliest dynasties that it had already become myth. Its original creators, whoever they were, had vanished, perhaps swallowed by cataclysm. The Sphinx may have stood watch through floods, droughts, and shifting sands long before the Nile flowed as it does now. By the time the pharaohs arrived, they may have treated the Sphinx not as a project, but as a relic, a remnant of the gods. An even more radical theory suggests that the Sphinx predates written history entirely, created by a forgotten global civilization that existed before the Younger Dryas, before the end of the last ice age. If true, that would place its origin at over 10,000 years old, the erosion on its flanks deep, vertical channels caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall seems to match this hypothesis. But rainfall of that kind hasn't graced the Giza Plateau in at least 7,000 years. If true, then the builders of the Sphinx were not the Egyptians but their ancestors, or an entirely different people, lost to time. And that might explain the silence. Imagine inheriting a structure you don't understand, a guardian made of stone, older than your oldest myths, looking toward the rising sun as if watching for something that will one day return. Would you inscribe your name on it, or would you leave it untouched? Mysterious, sacred. And what if the Sphinx wasn't just symbolic? What if it's part of a machine? A marker, a lock. Beneath its massive paws, geophysical surveys have revealed cavities, anomalies, suggesting chambers or tunnels. In 1993, a team using ground-penetrating radar found geometric anomalies beneath the Sphinx enclosure. But to this day, no one has been allowed to dig. Why? What are we not supposed to find? Perhaps the Sphinx's builders didn't want to be known. Or perhaps their story would change everything we think we know about our past. And so, she remains a guardian, a mystery, a monument whose silence speaks louder than any inscription. And tonight, as you drift further into the realm of dreams, imagine walking beneath the stars, approaching the Sphinx under a silver moon. The wind is still. The desert breathes in secrets. You place your hand against the ancient stone, and for a moment, you think you feel a heartbeat. Faint, eternal, a riddle, still waiting to be answered. In the flickering candlelight of ancient Athens, Plato once spoke of a land now lost beneath the waves. He didn't whisper about dreams or parables, but about a real place, a mighty civilization that vanished in a single night of earthquakes, fire, and flood. Its name was Atlantis. For centuries, many dismissed it as allegory, a fable, a philosopher's metaphor for arrogance and downfall. But what if it wasn't? What if Atlantis was real? What if Plato's tale wasn't a warning crafted in fiction, but a message passed down from a forgotten epic of mankind? He described Atlantis in startling detail, a vast empire with an advanced maritime fleet. Lush plains carved with irrigation canals, concentric rings of land and sea, and temples plated in shining metals. Its people were technologically gifted, deeply spiritual, yet ultimately arrogant. And so the gods, angered by their pride, unleashed nature upon them. In a single cataclysmic night, they were gone, swallowed by the ocean and erased from history. It all sounds like myth until you compare it to the real world. Take Giza, for example. The pyramids and the Sphinx stand not as crude works of emerging civilizations, but as monuments of unfathomable precision. And yet no one knows who truly built them. The deeper you dig, literally and historically, the more the story begins to mirror the Atlantis legend. Could the monuments of Egypt, and perhaps those scattered across the globe, be remnants of that same advanced culture Plato described? Consider the sudden end of the Ice Age. Around 11,600 years ago, the exact date Plato gives for Atlantis's destruction. This wasn't a slow melt. Something rapid and violent happened. Scientists now refer to it as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a theory that a comet or fragments of one slammed into the Earth, triggering firestorms, floods, and a plunge back into glacial conditions. Overnight, entire coastlines were swallowed. Ocean levels surged by over 100 meters. Inland seas appeared. Forests burned. And in the midst of all this chaos, any civilization living along coastal plains, as so many do, would have been utterly annihilated. Not in centuries, but in hours. And here's where it becomes haunting. Plato didn't just make up the story of Atlantis. He claimed he got it from Egyptian priests, keepers of ancient knowledge, who told the tale to Solon, his ancestor, during a visit to Sais. They told Solon of a mighty civilization that existed before Egypt, before even the Nile had fully taken its shape. A time when gods still walked among men, and wisdom was carved into the stones of forgotten temples. Those same priests also told him something else, that history moves in cycles. Civilizations rise, flourish, then fall, often not by their own doing, but by the sky itself. Fire from above, water from below, the earth shifting in her sleep. And it has happened before. Look to the megalithic ruins submerged off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, a vast stone structure resembling stepped terraces and platforms, resting silently beneath the waves. Or the massive stone spheres scattered across Costa Rica. The cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, with their interlocking stones so precise a razor cannot fit between them. And Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, older than any known temple, constructed with monumental artistry more than 11,000 years ago before writing, before agriculture, before cities. All of these sites whisper the same forbidden idea: we were advanced before we were supposed to be. If Plato's Atlantis existed, it may not have been a single island, but a global culture, connected by sea, stars, and a shared understanding of the Earth's rhythms. Giza, in this view, is not an isolated marvel, but one node in a network, a global map of stone. And perhaps the fall of Atlantis was not just a story of hubris, but a memory, a scar. What's more chilling is that Atlantis's fate, destruction by nature's wrath, mirrors modern warnings. Rising seas, changing climates, fragile coastlines built on illusion. Our world is increasingly aware of how delicate its balance truly is. Plato's myth, then, becomes not a legend, but a mirror. And yet, if Atlantis once stood, where is it now? Some believe it lies beneath the Azores, a submerged volcanic plateau in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, eerily aligned with Plato's description. Others point to Antarctica, buried beneath miles of ice, or to the sunken ruins near Bimini in the Bahamas, long, rectangular stone structures oddly out of place. Even the Sahara Desert, which was once a green, fertile paradise, has been proposed as the location, hiding ancient river systems and massive circular geological formations like the Richat structure, a natural formation that strangely resembles Atlantis's concentric rings. But maybe it isn't about where, maybe it's about when, and about remembering what we've forgotten. What if the story of Atlantis was passed down, not to entertain, but to preserve a warning that those who lose harmony with the earth lose everything? That technological prowess without spiritual grounding leads only to collapse. The builders of Giza, if they were Atlantean descendants, may have encoded this message in stone, aligning their pyramids with the stars, marking time through precession, tracking floods and eclipses and solar cycles as a means to prevent future catastrophes. Perhaps the great Sphinx, staring into the eastern horizon, does not simply mark the sunrise but watches for the return of something, a cycle, a danger, a reckoning. And so tonight, as you lay beneath the silence of stars, breathe deeply and listen, not just with your ears but with your bones. Feel the pulse of ancient civilizations in the wind, in the stillness between your heartbeats. Somewhere, buried beneath layers of time, a message waits, a warning once whispered in stone, carried across oceans, drowned in myth, and now, awakening once more. Atlantis may be gone, but its echo remains. Before the first written alphabet, before kingdoms rose and fell, before even the word Egypt existed, there were towers. Stone towers, silent sentinels carved not by words, but by memory. We call them pyramids now. But the ancient texts, those so old they whisper in dying languages, called them something else. Beacons, markers, lighthouses made not for ships, but for time. Built by hands we no longer remember, for reasons we've long since forgotten. And scattered across these fragments of lost scripture are subtle warnings like embers still glowing beneath ash. Take the Coptic scrolls, for instance, sacred texts from Egypt's earliest Christian communities. They tell of primeval structures that predate the flood, not metaphorical towers, but physical ones, anchored in stone, reaching to the sky. Some bore inscriptions, others were silent. Some shone with light, not of flame, but of reflection gleaming in the sun like mirrors to the heavens. They were said to guard something, or warn of something. And then there's the Book of Enoch, one of the oldest apocalyptic texts on Earth, long banned from biblical canons, hidden away for centuries in caves and desert monasteries. In its pages, Enoch speaks of a time when the Watcher's beings of immense knowledge descended from the heavens and taught humanity secrets: astronomy, architecture, the calendar, the naming of things. But the part most often overlooked is what came before the Watchers. Enoch describes great towers that already stood in the Earth's earliest days, stone constructs so ancient, so alien in origin, that even the Watchers themselves bowed before them. He writes of mountains cut with unnatural angles, standing isolated in the flatlands, with passageways that led not only below the earth, but beyond time itself. He never calls them pyramids, but what else could they be? The Giza Plateau bears their silent signature. The Great Pyramid, with its polished limestone casing once gleaming in the sun, may have been visible for miles, reflecting light like a beacon. Not a tomb, not a temple, but a lighthouse. One not of the sea, but of epochs, of deep time. Today, its outer shell is mostly gone, stripped away by centuries of human need. But deep inside, the mystery remains. A shaft aimed precisely at the stars, a chamber that hums, an entrance guarded not by statues or soldiers, but by geometry itself. And still the pyramid watches. The idea of lighthouses as warnings is not new. Sailors have depended on them for centuries. But what if ancient humanity, perhaps even pre-humanity, had already endured one great catastrophe? One so profound that they built towers to mark the memory, not to guide ships, but to warn civilizations yet to come. That's what the texts imply, warnings encoded in stone. In the Coptic tradition, there's a tale of a pharaoh who foresaw a great flood. So he summoned his priests, his sages, his sons of the stars, and ordered them to inscribe all knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, medicine onto the walls of indestructible towers. When the waters receded, that knowledge would remain, awaiting rediscovery. Some versions say those towers were built at Giza. In one particularly obscure fragment of pseudo-Enochian scripture, now scattered among private collections, there is mention of a pillar of warning. It stood alone in the desert. At its summit was a metal that hummed when touched by the wind. Beneath it, in deep chambers sealed with stone, were the calculations of the stars, the name of the wind that brings fire, and the number of the suns that must pass before the sky falls again. The descriptions are poetic, cryptic, but what if they're literal? Look across the world, from the Osirion at Abydos, with its megalithic blocks submerged below water level, to the Tower of Babel myth in Mesopotamia. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia speak of towers built in defiance of nature, towers that connect heaven and earth, towers that are destroyed, or buried, or silenced. Over and over again, the pattern returns: a great structure, a flood, a warning forgotten, and a cycle that begins anew. Even the name pyramid might be misleading. In ancient Egyptian, the original name of the Great Pyramid is Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. But Akhet wasn't just a poetic term. It referred to the place where the sun rises between two mountains, the dawn of a new age. Was it symbolic or was it literal? marking a moment in Earth's celestial rhythm when something would return. That's what these forgotten texts hint at. The pyramids, and other stone towers like them, are part of a cosmic clock. They are lighthouses. Yes, but ones attuned not to ocean tides, but to astronomical ones. Cycles of destruction. Erosion patterns on the Sphinx suggest it once endured thousands of years of rain that hasn't fallen on the Giza plateau for over 7,000 years. Who built it? And why does it face exactly due east, staring into the equinox? Why do the shafts of the Great Pyramid align with Orion's belt and Sirius? Why do legends from Mexico, Turkey, Cambodia, and Mesopotamia all tell of gods or kings building tall towers to preserve the memory of Earth before a great fire or flood? Perhaps because it already happened, more than once, and perhaps because we're meant to remember. Imagine this, a long-forgotten civilization, let's call them the first architects, saw the signs. They understood precession, solar flares, orbital wobbles, and cycles of cosmic impact. They saw what was coming, and instead of saving themselves, they built monuments, anchors of knowledge, libraries of stone. But stone can't shout, it can only wait. And now we're the ones walking among these towers, mistaking them for tombs, stripping away their casing, decoding their angles without ever asking what they were pointing toward. Maybe, in their silence, they're still calling out. Remember, this has happened before. It will happen again. So tonight, under the slow drift of stars, as the modern world hums with artificial light and digital noise, the stone lighthouses remain quiet, eternal, patient. Not tombs, not temples, but beacons. And one day, if we learn to listen not just to what's written, but to what was etched into the very bones of the earth, we might hear the warning still echoing across the ages. The flood comes for those who forget. The desert wind carries stories older than paper, older than speech, older than memory. It sweeps across the Giza plateau, brushing past the ruins, past the broken temples and scattered stones, whispering not of death, but of knowledge. Beneath the gaze of the Sphinx, beside the mighty Nile, rises the most mysterious structure on earth, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It has stood for thousands of years, defying the ravages of time, weather, and war. But what if we've misunderstood it completely? What if this colossal stone monument was never a tomb? What if it was a library? Not one with scrolls or books, but a library written in architecture, in mathematics, in cosmic alignment. A black box for humanity, designed to outlast catastrophe, to speak without words, and to remind future civilizations of who we once were and what we must remember. Let's begin with the most striking fact: no body has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. No sarcophagus in the traditional sense, no funerary inscriptions, no wall carvings, no paintings. Nothing that would normally accompany a royal burial in ancient Egypt. In fact, compared to the richly decorated tombs of the Valley of the Kings, the Great Pyramid is eerily sterile. What tomb hides its purpose so well? And then there's the mathematics encoded with uncanny precision. The Great Pyramid's base is almost a perfect square, and its orientation is aligned with true north to within 3/60th of a degree, a level of precision most modern cities still fail to achieve. Its original height, 146.6 meters, and base perimeter correspond exactly with Earth's size, scale, and curvature when multiplied by specific constants. Its proportions encode the value of pi and the golden ratio. Its internal passages reflect the precession of the equinoxes. Its position on the Earth sits at the geographical center of all landmasses, a fact we didn't even understand until modern satellite mapping. Why would a tomb do that? Then there's the internal design, a labyrinth, not a resting place. 3 chambers, one underground, one in the middle, and one high above the so-called king's chamber. Each one cut with mathematical precision, with shafts pointing toward stars, Orion's belt, Sirius, Thuban. These are not funerary features. They are astronomical instruments. And inside the king's chamber lies something else, something almost always overlooked, a resonance. When sound is made within the chamber, especially low-frequency tones, it amplifies unnaturally. Researchers and explorers have long noticed it. Some even claim to feel a vibration in their bones when they chant or hum in the room. Is this coincidence or design? What kind of tomb is tuned like a musical instrument? There are no hieroglyphs inside, no record of who built it, no explanation, not even graffiti, which is remarkably rare for a structure so old and accessible. And yet, hidden within its geometry is a message written not in language but in universal constants. That's what libraries do. They store information in ways that can be decoded even by those who speak another tongue. And the most universal language of all is mathematics. Let's go deeper. Some researchers have begun to propose an audacious theory that the Great Pyramid was designed to preserve knowledge through cataclysm, that it was a deliberate attempt to pass down the secrets of astronomy, geodesy, and even timekeeping through the only material that could survive millennia of upheaval: stone. Think of it like a black box on an airplane meant to survive the crash, to tell future investigators what went wrong. Except in this case, it's humanity's black box. And it doesn't just preserve knowledge of our planet, but of the sky. Inside its angles are the mechanics of celestial movements. The great year, the 26,000-year precessional cycle, is encoded in the ascending passage, the alignment with the Orion constellation, which occurred perfectly around 10,500 BCE, suggests it was meant to point back to that era and age long before Egypt rose. Why? Perhaps because that's when something was lost, or when something was meant to be remembered. Ancient Egyptian lore, especially from the priesthood of Heliopolis, tells of a first time, or Zep Tepi, when gods walked the earth and built the original temples. Later dynasties, like those of the Pharaohs, only inherited these sacred structures. They didn't build them. They simply repurposed them. That's why the earliest pyramids are the most advanced. Over time, the architecture becomes less precise, less aligned, more symbolic. The Great Pyramid is not a culmination, it's a starting point. Even the ancient Greek historian Herodotus recorded Egyptian priests telling him the Great Pyramid predated their own civilization by thousands of years. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses this, but the erosion patterns on the Sphinx, the geological layers around the plateau, and astronomical data all support an earlier date. So what kind of event might this pyramid be warning us about? Look to the myths. Across cultures, Maya, Vedic, Norse, Babylonian, Egyptian, we see recurring stories: a great flood, a fall from the stars, a sky fire, or a dark age descending after a golden one. Some blame gods, others blame comets or solar storms, but they all agree something happened. And afterward, the survivors preserved knowledge, sometimes in temples, sometimes in stone tablets, sometimes in sacred oral traditions. But what if the most ambitious among them decided to create a structure that would outlast time itself? A pyramid resilient to earthquakes, wind, war, and erosion, built on bedrock, with no fragile scrolls to decay, no language to misinterpret, just numbers, geometry, and alignment truths that endure. And now, here we are, a global civilization, digitally connected, technologically advanced, And yet, historically amnesiac. We've mapped the stars, but forgotten the stories. We've measured the earth, but ignored the whispers. We've decoded the angles of the Great Pyramid, yet still ask what it's for. Maybe that's the point. Maybe it was never meant to be understood by its own builders' children, but by a civilization far in the future. One with satellites, telescopes, global positioning systems. One like ours. And maybe the reason it still stands is not because it was meant to impress, but because it was meant to remind of what? That we are not the first. That the sky has fallen before. That knowledge must be preserved not just in data centers, but in ways that withstand fire, flood, and forgetting. That's the role of a library, and Giza may be the oldest, largest, and most enduring one humanity has ever known. The desert wind moves like a memory, soft, relentless, ancient. It glides over limestone blocks older than kings, over footprints long since swept away, over the silent geometry of something left behind not to be seen, but remembered. Giza sleeps, but not like a tomb. It dreams. The Sphinx does not speak. It listens. And the Great Pyramid does not rise in pride, it waits, in silence, like a sealed message carved for eyes that have not yet opened. We began this journey with a question that was never truly ours. What if everything we've been told about Giza is wrong? But the sands answered with something stranger. What if it's not wrong, just forgotten? 15 clues scattered across the stone. Not relics, not ruins, signals, rain erosion etched into the Sphinx. From a time when this desert drank from the sky. Vertical fissures not made by wind, but by falling water that hasn't graced this place in over 9,000 years. A timeline that breaks the dynasties. That suggests the Sphinx is not a guardian of Egypt's glory, but a witness to something far older. And the pyramids, they don't just stand on a once lush savanna. They point. Their angles mirror the stars. Their proportions match the Earth's geometry. Their alignment to true north is more precise than the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. They whisper numbers that echo the planet's slow wobble 43,200, a precessional cycle known only through long-term astronomical observation. Knowledge ancient Egypt was not supposed to have, and yet someone had it. Within the king's chamber, the stone resonates at a frequency that tickles the edge of the human nervous system. It hums, not as a metaphor, but in measured hertz. Was it music? Was it medicine? Was it a signal? We still do not know. What we do know is that resonance was not accidental. It was carved, tuned, intended. Millimeter-perfect foundations, 2.1 centimeters of variance across 13 acres, laid before the invention of the wheel. Compare it, if you must, to other ancient enigmas. Stonehenge, Baalbek, Göbekli Tepe structures that span continents, but share the same obsessions: stars, sound, and unexplainable precision. Why do these sites, separated by oceans and eras, all carry the same fingerprints? Were these scattered memories, or pages from the same book? Some believe these are echoes of a lost global civilization, one not erased by time, but by water, by fire, by sky. Atlantis, they called it in Greece. Zep Tepi in Egypt, the first time. Plato said it sank in a single night of earthquakes and floods. The Sahara's green memory suggests such a thing was not only possible, but probable. Then the robot came. Gantenbrink's tiny crawler entered the pyramid's narrow shaft in 1993 and found a door, then another, and then silence. Why? What lies beyond that door that can't be seen? And under the Sphinx, why no digging? When radar has shown us right angles, chambers, and shapes that do not occur in nature, what are we not supposed to find? It's not just stone that's missing. It's the story. Inscriptions from the earliest kings, lost. Chambers collapsed. Whole records burned. Pharaohs who etched their names on every column and coffin avoided the Sphinx. Why? What if anonymity was not neglect, but protection? And what if the pyramids were never tombs? No mummies were found inside them. No inscriptions claimed them. No funerary texts line their halls. Instead, we find proportions, mathematics, frequencies. We find intention. We find design. So what are they? Perhaps they are not monuments to death, but containers of memory. Not graves, but warnings. There are scrolls hidden, discredited, or simply lost, whispering of stone lighthouses, built by people who walked before language. The Book of Enoch, the Coptic texts, and those strange fragments that scholars brush aside because they don't fit the timeline. And maybe that's the point. They don't fit because the timeline itself is broken, edited, rewritten. What if the purpose of Giza was never glory, but preservation? What if the pyramid is a black box, not built for kings, but for the survivors of the next fall? A legacy encoded in stone, a message to whoever comes next, to tell them we were here, we knew things. Don't make the same mistake, because if this has happened before, it can happen again. The climate changed once. It can change again. The oceans rose. They will rise again. And the desert, it wasn't always a desert. Beneath your feet lies not just sand, but sediment. Not just time, but memory. A library made of limestone. A story told in silence. A riddle written in resonance. Waiting for the moment when someone, somewhere, finally learns how to listen. And perhaps, when the stars realign, when the planet wobbles back to the beginning, and the water returns to the sand, the pyramids will not speak. They will not glow. They will not open. They will simply be waiting, as they always have, as they always will.